I rang the doorbell and waited. Nothing. I knocked. Harder this time. Still nothing. I exhaled, already regretting coming all the way here. 2 months, 2 whole months, without rent. That wasn't like her. My tenant was reliable, quiet, always on time. And now, radio silence. Had she moved out? Skipped town? Was she even okay? I knocked again, more impatient now, and when suddenly, click! The door cracked open, and standing there wasn't my tenant. It was a man, a young man, tall, dark, broad-shouldered, built like someone who worked with his hands or fought life head-on. His skin was smooth and deep brown, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass, lips full and slightly parted like he'd just woken up. His hair, thick, a little messy as if fingers had just run through it. I was staring. I knew I was staring. And judging by the slow smirk creeping onto his face, so did he. "You're not my tenant," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. He leaned lazily against the doorframe, arms crossed.
"Nope."
I waited for him to explain. He didn't. Just watched me with dark, unreadable eyes. Something about him made my stomach tighten, not in fear, not exactly. "I'm looking for the woman who rents this place," I said. "Where is she?" He tilted his head, studying me like he was deciding something. Then with zero urgency, he stepped back and pushed the door open wider.
"Come inside."
It wasn't a request. It was something else. And against all better judgment, I did. The apartment was dim, the air thick with the scent of warm blankets and faint antiseptic. I stepped inside, and there she was, my tenant, lying in bed, looking pale and fragile, nothing like the quiet, independent woman I'd rented to. Her eyes flickered open, and when she saw me, she tried to sit up. "Jennifer," she rasped, her voice weak, "I'm so sorry about the rent. I meant to..." "Hey, don't worry about that now," I said, holding up a hand. "You should be resting."
"She doesn't listen."
The young man, Elijah, as he introduced himself, muttered, crossing his arms. Up close, he was even more striking. Strong jaw, smooth dark skin, an effortless kind of presence that made it hard to look away.
"My mom's been sick for weeks. I came to take care of her, but..."
He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck.
"It's been rough. No insurance. Everything's going to her meds. That's why..."
He stopped, but he didn't have to finish. I got it. Normally I'd be annoyed. 2 months behind on rent? That was a problem. I wasn't exactly the type to hand out sympathy. I ran things straight. Business first. But standing here, looking at his mother, looking at him, I heard myself saying something completely out of character. "Forget the rent for now," I said. "Just focus on her. If there's anything you need, anything I can do, just ask." Elijah's eyes snapped to mine. For a second, he didn't move. Didn't even breathe. Then something in his expression softened, like I'd just lifted a weight off his shoulders. I swear, for half a second, it looked like he wanted to hug me. Instead, his lips parted like he was about to say something. Maybe thank you, maybe you don't have to do this. But before he could, I reached out and gave his shoulder a quick pat. Bad move. His shoulder wasn't just a shoulder. It was solid, strong. My palm met muscle, firm and warm under his thin t-shirt, and suddenly the air between us shifted. I felt it. He felt it. The corner of his mouth twitched just slightly, and I yanked my hand back like I'd touched a stove. Well, I stammered, suddenly aware of how small the room felt. "Take care of her?" Then I turned and walked out of there before I did something even more out of character. By the time I got to my car, my heart was racing. What the hell was that? I wasn't nice. I didn't go around handing out sympathy and rent forgiveness like some kind of charity. And I definitely didn't react like that just from touching someone's shoulder. But as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to shake the weird warmth still lingering on my fingertips, I had to face it. Something about Elijah had me acting real strange. I drove halfway down the street before reality hit me. 2 months, 2 whole months without rent. And what was I doing? Playing Mother Teresa? Acting like some kind of savior? That wasn't me. This apartment was my income, My only income. I wasn't some rich retiree handing out charity. If Elijah and his mother couldn't pay, I had to find tenants who could. Simple as that. And yet, I turned the car around. When I knocked this time, Elijah answered faster, his expression a mix of confusion and curiosity.
Back so soon?
He asked, leaning against the doorframe again, those dark eyes scanning me. I crossed my arms. I have a perfect solution for you. His brows lifted.
Do you?
Yes, why don't you two move in with me? He blinked.
What?
I live in Biltmore. Big house, too much space. You need a place. I need paying tenants here. I shrugged like this was the most logical thing in the world. 2 birds, 1 stone. Elijah just stared at me. Then he let out a short laugh, shaking his head.
Wait. So let me get this straight. We can't afford rent here in North Phoenix, and you're offering us a place in Biltmore, the neighborhood where all the big shots live?
He narrowed his eyes, studying me like I'd just told him he won the lottery.
We couldn't afford that in 100 years.
I waved a hand. I'm not charging you. That shut him up. He rubbed the back of his neck, still watching me like he was waiting for the catch.
So let me get this straight. You're letting 2 people, one of them sick, crash in your big fancy house for free?
Exactly.
That's weird.
I shrugged again, playing it cool even though I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But I knew one thing. I wasn't just offering out of kindness. No, there was something about Elijah. A connection, an energy. Maybe it was loneliness on my part. Maybe something else. But if housing his mother was the price to have him close, I could deal with that. Elijah turned to look at his mother, who was still lying in bed. He walked over to her, leaned down, and murmured something too low for me to hear. She looked at me, eyes searching, then back at him. A few seconds passed. Then Elijah stood up, exhaled, and turned back to me.
This would be a huge favor,
he said, his voice quieter now.
Like, you don't even know. It's like you're God sent.
Don't get emotional, I said, cutting him off before he could make this into some heartfelt moment. Just pack your things. I'll arrange a mover. He let out a breath, shaking his head like he still couldn't believe it.
All right,
he said.
We'll do it.
The second I left that apartment, I was buzzing. Excited. A little too excited. I pulled out my phone right there on the street and called Rick, an old friend who ran a moving company. Hey, Rick, you free tomorrow?
For you, sweetheart? Always.
He chuckled.
What's the job?
A small move. Just a couple of people from North Phoenix to my place in Biltmore. There was a pause.
Wait, your place?
Yes. Another pause.
Jennifer, you adopting strays now?
I rolled my eyes. Just book me in, Rick.
All right.
He laughed.
Tomorrow morning, first thing.
I hung up, feeling a thrill run through me. Elijah was moving in, and suddenly the hours stretched long. When I got home, I paced around, too restless to sit. I'd lived alone for years, my house quiet, my routines predictable. But now, knowing Elijah was coming, it was like something in me woke up. I headed straight to the bathroom. If I was going to have company, I needed to look the part. First, a long shower, then waxing down there. Shaved my legs, smooth as silk. Did a full facial routine, exfoliating every inch. Even threw on some lotion that smelled like vanilla and honey. Halfway through, I caught myself in the mirror. What the hell was I doing? No matter how much I buffed, scrubbed, and smoothed, I wasn't 20 anymore. Hell, I wasn't even 40. Age was just a number, sure, but not when it came to this. I sighed, running a towel over my face. Mutton dressed as lamb, as they say. And yet, I kept going. The next morning, I was up before sunrise, brewing coffee but barely drinking it. My stomach, too, wound up. At 10, I called Elijah. You ready? I asked, my voice more casual than I felt.
Yeah,
he said.
The movers are here now. We should be there in an hour.
1 hour, 60 minutes. It was the longest countdown of my life. I fluffed the couch pillows, adjusted the vase on the dining table, checked my reflection at least 5 times. Then finally, ding dong, I froze. The bell rang again. I took a deep breath, smoothed my shirt, and walked to the door, heart pounding. I opened it, and there he was. Elijah standing in my doorway, broad shoulders filling out a plain white t-shirt, his skin gleaming under the Arizona sun. His dark eyes met mine, and for a second, neither of us spoke. Then he gave me that slow, easy grin.
Well,
He said, glancing around.
this is something else.
I stepped aside, forcing a smile, even as my pulse hammered. Welcome home. Elijah and his mom arrived right on time. She sat in a wheelchair, bundled in a light cardigan, her face tired but gentle. Elijah was behind her, pushing the chair, and right after them came the movers, carrying the few belongings they had. It wasn't much. A couple of suitcases, a small table, some boxes. But I wasn't looking at the boxes. I was looking at them. These movers were young, built like they spent half their time lifting weights. Probably barely 25, all of them. Arms tight with muscle, veins running down their forearms, sweat glistening under the Arizona heat. And Elijah, God help me. When he grabbed that table, alone without a second thought, and lifted it effortlessly, his biceps flexed, and I swear I forgot how to breathe. I saw the way his triceps tightened, the way his shirt stretched over his broad chest. A full-grown man in his prime, built for strength, I needed to cool down. So like a good hostess, I went to the kitchen and made lemonade, a distraction, a way to keep my hands busy. When they were done, I handed out the drinks, watching as they all gulped it down. Then, one by one, the movers left, giving Elijah quick daps before heading out. And just like that, it was just me and him. Elijah took his mother to her room, made sure she was settled, and then finally came back to the living room. He dropped onto the couch with a sigh, his chest rising and falling, his skin damp with sweat. His t-shirt clung to him, making it impossible not to stare. I sat beside him, close, maybe too close. I reached out, my fingers grazing his hand. He looked at me, surprised, but didn't pull away. You don't have to worry about anything now, I said softly. I'm here. I was close enough to feel the heat coming off his skin, close enough to see the little beads of sweat at his temple. For a second, he just looked at me. Then, just as quickly, I stood up. Wait here, I said, heading down the hall. I grabbed a fresh towel and came back, holding it out. Come on, let's get you freshened up. He blinked.
Huh?
I didn't give him a chance to protest. I led him to the bathroom, stepping inside with him, standing so close I could feel the warmth of his body against mine. This is the shower, I said, reaching over to turn the handle. Water sprayed against the glass. Here's the hot, here's the cold. He was barely listening. His chest rose and fell a little faster now, his eyes locked on mine. I knew I was testing limits, pushing boundaries. I didn't care. With a slow inhale, I finally stepped back. I'll let you freshen up, I murmured, slipping out the door. I closed it behind me and exhaled, pressing my back against the wall. What the hell was I doing? I didn't know. I just knew I wanted more. Minutes passed. Then the bathroom door opened. Elijah stepped out, steam curling behind him, a towel wrapped loosely around his waist. I swallowed, hard. His skin was damp, droplets of water sliding down his abs. His shoulders looked even broader now, his chest sculpted, his body pure, solid muscle. And then it happened. He moved too quickly, probably embarrassed, hurrying toward his room, and the towel slipped. It hit the floor, and my jaw dropped. I had seen men before. I had been married. I had lived. But this was something else. His back turned for just a split second before he grabbed the towel and disappeared into his room. The door shut. I stood there frozen. He had been here for barely an hour, and I was already losing control. I stepped out into the front yard, the cool evening air doing little to settle the storm inside me. I sat on the bench staring at the empty street, thinking about everything that had just happened. What the hell am I doing? I'm 60 years old. He's barely 25. This was ridiculous. I had never acted like this before. I never let myself spiral into emotions without thinking things through. I wasn't the type to do impulsive, reckless things, and yet here I was, inviting a young, built, breathtaking man into my home, practically offering him my world on a silver platter. Was it loneliness? Was it just because I finally had someone here with me? Or was it something darker? Something selfish? I didn't know, and I didn't want to think too hard about it. That's when I noticed Elijah moving through the living room, stretching his arms, looking around as if getting used to this place. And suddenly an idea struck. I stood up and walked back inside, clearing my throat. Elijah, can you help me with something? He turned, raising an eyebrow.
Sure. What is it?
I led him to the library. It was one of my favorite places in the house. Dark wooden shelves, soft golden lighting, the scent of old pages filling the air. The top shelves, however, were high enough that even Elijah, tall as he was, would struggle to reach them. I pointed. I need those books up there. He walked forward, stretching up, fingers brushing the spines, but falling just short.
Damn.
He muttered, lowering his arm.
That's higher than I thought.
I bit my lip. This was exactly what I wanted. Well, I said, feigning deep thought. How about this? You lift me up and I'll grab them. He hesitated.
Lift you?
Yes. I crossed my arms. I'm not that heavy, am I? No, that's not what I meant, he said quickly, flustered.
I just come. Sure. Yeah. Okay.
He stepped closer, his hands coming around my waist. I felt his strength instantly. With barely any effort, he lifted me, his grip firm, his body close, so close. And I pretended to struggle with the books, just to prolong the moment. His breath was uneven. I could feel the way he was reacting, the nervous energy rolling off him. He wasn't used to this, wasn't used to being in this kind of situation, and yet he held me, steady and secure as I pretended to fumble for the books. Got them? I finally announced. He lowered me slowly, his hands lingering a second too long before finally letting go. Feet back on the ground, I turned, pinched his cheek, and smirked. Good boy. He let out a nervous chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. I walked over to the small couch in the library, flipping through the book in my hands. Delta of Venus. I grinned to myself. This was perfect. I love reading these novels, I said casually. Elijah glanced at the book.
Yeah? What's it about?
I raised an eyebrow. Why don't I read to you? He shrugged.
All right. I like listening.
Poor thing had no idea what he was in for. I flipped to one of the stories and began reading, my voice smooth, measured, letting each word settle in the air. At first, he just listened, sitting across from me, his expression neutral. But then the story deepened. The words became richer, darker, sensual. I stole glances at him, watching, waiting, and there it was, the shift, the slight tension in his jaw, the way he suddenly adjusted in his seat, clearing his throat, pretending he wasn't affected. Oh, he was affected. I kept reading, voice lowering, my eyes flicking up every so often, catching the nervous way his fingers tapped against his knee. He swallowed. I smirked. This was fun. I tapped the book against my palm, pretending to be deep in thought. You know, Elijah, I mused, crossing one leg over the other. Anais Nin really knew how to capture
Hunger.
Elijah, seated on the couch across from me, shifted slightly. Hunger? His voice came out uneven. I nodded, keeping my gaze locked on him. Not the kind you satisfy with food. His Adam's apple bobbed. I let the silence settle between us, watching the way his fingers twitched against his knee, as if unsure where to place them. He's nervous. How endearing. I tilted my head and smirked. You look like you've got something to say, Elijah. Don't tell me you're suddenly shy? He exhaled a short laugh, shaking his head.
You just, you catch me off guard sometimes.
I grinned. Good. Keeps things interesting. Standing up, I walked over to the bookshelf, running my fingers across the spines. You remember this part where the woman, what was her name? Ah, yes. Elena, she dared the man to close his eyes and trust her. I turned, tilting my chin. Do you trust me, Elijah? His breath hitched.
Yeah?
I clapped my hands together. Perfect. Close your eyes. He hesitated, then exhaled and obeyed. I took my time, stepping closer, watching the way his jaw tightened. Then carefully, deliberately, I reached out and ran my fingers along his forearm. He tensed. You're so stiff, I teased, leaning in. Relax. This isn't a horror story. He let out a breath, his lips twitching into something close to a smile.
Feels like one.
I feigned offense. Oh, come now. This is literature. You said you liked listening, didn't you? He nodded, still keeping his eyes closed. Good. I leaned in, whispering near his ear. Then let me show you the best parts. His eyes snapped open, and in that instant I saw it. The shift, the surrender, the quiet want that neither of us had dared name until now. I smiled, and then I finally closed the space between us. There in the library, surrounded by the words of long-dead poets and scandalous novelists, we let a new story unfold.